Thank you for joining us to review this presentation on the H Street Bridge Northeast Replacement Project. Originally, DDOT had planned to hold a public meeting to present the findings of the environmental assessment. However, in order to reduce the risk for COVID-19, as defined by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Mayor Bowser's current coronavirus mayor's orders, this presentation is provided in digital format for your review. This environmental assessment was approved by the Federal Highway Administration for public review in September 2021. The public review period begins on September 15, 2021 and will end on October 15, 2021. DDOT is interested in your learning about the project through this presentation, reviewing the environmental assessment posted on the website, and submitting comments on the project by October 15, 2021 to DDOT. These comments will assist FHWA and DDOT to decide on whether the project should be approved for construction. DDOT has requested to use federal funds from the FHWA to pay for the construction of this project. The project is estimated to cost $261,444,000. The commitment of using federal funds by FHWA is an action subject to the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which is a process that requires FHWA to assess the environmental effects of the project prior to making a decision to fund the project so that DDOT could hire a contractor to construct it. Therefore, DDOT, in conjunction with FHWA, has prepared this environmental assessment, which is now available for your review and comment. The agenda for the presentation is outlined on this slide. This lists the order of the topics we'll explain in the presentation. There will be a brief introduction to the project location and bridge history. Then you'll be provided a summary of the purpose of the project and why the project is needed. Next, a summary of information included in the environmental assessment will be provided. This includes the existing conditions, key stakeholders, and environmental resources. Then a summary of the alternatives for the project will be provided, including a summary of those alternatives considered, as well as the alternatives summarized in the environmental assessment, the no-build and build alternative. The no-build is a no-action or do-nothing alternative. The build alternative is what DDOT wants to construct and FHWA is proposing to fund. Once you hear about the project proposed for construction, we will explain the impacts that would occur to the environment if the project would be constructed. Lastly, we will explain other types of evaluations and consultations conducted for the project. We will conclude the presentation by explaining the process for you to participate in the review of the environmental assessment and how to submit your comments to FHWA and DDOT. This will also include an explanation of the next steps in the project schedule. The H Street Bridge Northeast, also known as the Hopscotch Bridge, is located over the Amtrak rail yard just north of Washington Union Station. You can see the location of the bridge on the map to the left, indicated by the red rectangle. The picture on the right shows the bridge looking south towards Union Station. The bridge provides a connection between North Capitol Street and 3rd Street Northeast in the District of Columbia. The western approach to the bridge is flanked by office buildings, whilst to the east there are some office buildings, but the area is primarily residential. Some of the adjacent buildings are located just a few feet from the edge of the bridge. Multiple forms of transportation, including rail, bus, streetcar, taxi, and private vehicles, all come together at the location of the bridge. There will be more details on that later on in this presentation. Let's step back a bit to review the history of the bridge. Originally, H Street Northeast was a road that provided an east-west connection that linked North Capitol Street, 1st Street Northeast, Delaware Avenue, 2nd Street Northeast, and 3rd Street Northeast in a neighborhood known as Swampoodle. In 1907, Union Station and its associated rail yards were opened. H Street Northeast was moved to a 750-foot-long underpass or tunnel beneath the rail yards. 1st Street Northeast was realigned to the west of the new rail yards, and Delaware Avenue closed in the vicinity of the new yards. The H Street underpass remained in service until the 1970s, when due to the deteriorating condition of the structure, it was determined necessary to rebuild the connection. Ultimately, it was decided to replace the underpass with a new overpass structure that would connect North Capitol Street and 3rd Street Northeast and provide a link to the new parking garage that was under construction over the rail yard at that time. The opening of the new overpass coincided with the bicentennial celebration in 1976. Then in 2016, the streetcar station was opened on top of the bridge. As a part of the new project and the preparation of the NEPA document, a purpose and need statement is prepared. The purpose of the project is to replace the H Street Bridge Northeast and accommodate the modernization of Washington Union Station proposed by the Union Station Redevelopment Corporation and the adjacent Burnham Place commercial and residential development proposed by Akridge. The H Street Bridge Northeast needs to be replaced to address structural deficiencies, maintain modal relationships, and support the economic development within and adjacent to the Washington Union Station. The purpose and need is included in Chapter 1 of the Environmental Assessment. The photographs on this slide show the deteriorating bridge condition and the underpass. The photograph on the left shows the spalling concrete and exposed reinforcement at the top of one of the concrete bridge columns. The photograph in the middle shows deteriorating concrete and exposed reinforcement on the underside of the bridge deck over the rail yard. Whilst the bridge is in poor condition, DDOT continues to undertake inspections at an increased frequency and make repairs to protect the safety of the users of the bridge and rail yard below. The photograph on the far right shows what remains inside the 8th Street underpass. To initiate the analysis in the NEPA study, the existing conditions along the project corridor were identified. For many of you that live near to the bridge or that traveled the project corridor, much of this will be very familiar. The project corridor, shown within the red line on this slide, is approximately 2,000 feet long, from the center line of North Capitol Street on the west to the center line of 3rd Street Northeast on the east. Central to the corridor is a 1,442-foot long bridge over the 4th Street Northeast, the WMATA Red Line, the Amtrak Rail Yard, and 2nd Street Northeast. 8th Street carries 3 lanes of traffic in each direction from North Capitol Street to the top of the bridge. To the east, it carries 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, with a barrier-separated streetcar track in the median. It widens to 8 lanes in the center of the bridge to include a right-side bus auxiliary lane westbound, a center turn lane westbound to the Union Station parking garage, and a right turn lane eastbound. 2 bus stops and a streetcar station are located on the top of the bridge. There is a continuous sidewalk on both sides of the bridge. The bridge provides vehicular and pedestrian access to the Union Station parking garage, the Union Station intercity bus facility, and the station place and Union Station loading docks. This sectional drawing along the length of the bridge shows the 8th Street Bridge at the topmost level with its relatively steep approaches that allow it to rise over the rail yard. Below the rail yard is the 8th Street underpass. The underpass is similar to K Street, L Street, M Street, and Florida Avenue to the north, with its multiple steel columns supporting the rail tracks above. These photographs show the constrained urban environment of the bridge, with the roadway and streetcar tracks and platform on the top of the bridge, the rail yard below the bridge, and access to the Union Station public parking and intercity bus facility. Due to the constrained urban environment and future developments envisioned for this part of the Washington, D.C., the project team has coordinated with multiple key stakeholders throughout the preparation of this environmental assessment. Amtrak owns and operates the tracks and platforms beneath the bridge, and also owns the REA building on the east side of the rail yard. DC State Historic Preservation Office at the 8th Street Bridge Northeast spans the Washington Union Station historic site. DDOT DC streetcar staff at streetcar tracks and platform are located on the bridge. The Federal Railroad Administration are the lead federal agency for the Union Station expansion project. The Union Station Redevelopment Corporation manage Union Station and are one of the proponents involved in the plans for the Union Station expansion project. Ackridge, who are a private developer and owner of the air rights above the Union Station rail yard, both to the north and south of the bridge. They are planning the Burnham Place development for this space. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or WMATA, has its 2 red line tracks running beneath the bridge. There are 10 properties directly adjacent to the bridge with whom the project has coordinated. Additionally, the community that lives, works, and transits throughout the project corridor are represented by ANC 6C. The project alternatives evaluated in the environmental assessment include a no-build alternative and a build alternative. Development of the build alternative occurred through the coordination with many of the project stakeholders to understand project constraints. Certain aspects of each alternative were kept the same. For example, the new bridge would be constructed within existing right-of-way, and the street configuration on top of the bridge would be the same. Variation between the concepts was in the location and type of bridge supports and construction methodology. Ultimately, the build alternative was selected through an evaluation that weighed up multiple different factors that were identified through the early project coordination. The alternatives are described in Chapter 2 of the environmental assessment. For the no-build alternative, there will be no changes to the existing 8th Street Bridge Northeast. The existing fracture-critical bridge would remain, requiring continual, frequent inspections and maintenance activities by DDOT. Because the bridge is reaching the end of its expected lifespan, it would require rehabilitation or replacement in the near future. The no-build alternative is retained as a baseline against which to measure the effects of the proposed build alternative. In the following slides, we will present certain key aspects of the build alternative, including how it addresses the project purpose and need. The bridge will be constructed entirely within existing public right-of-way and will not require acquisition of any permanent property rights. Various property agreements will be required with adjacent properties during the construction phase of the project to access their property. During construction, traffic will be maintained across the bridge and to adjacent properties except for limited off-peak closures to allow some safety-critical construction activities. The proposed bridge will be compatible with the existing Amtrak platforms and tracks beneath the bridge. The proposed bridge will also be compatible with the layout of tracks and platforms proposed for the Union Station expansion project. Lastly, the layout of the bridge will accommodate future new intersection proposed for the Burnham Place development planned for the air rights north and south of the bridge. This slide shows images of the bridge as it will look once it is constructed. Once complete, the bridge appearance will be very similar to the existing bridge. It will have a concrete deck that is supported on steel girders. New concrete bridge piers will be constructed within the limited available space within the rail yard and extend through 8th Street underpass below. Much of the foundation construction work will therefore be completed from within the underpass. The streetcar station stop will be reconstructed a few hundred feet to the west to move it closer to the pedestrian walkway into Union Station. The single streetcar track on the bridge will be replaced by a pair of parallel tracks that will allow for significant improvement in the streetcar operations. The layout of streetcar track and platform will accommodate existing intersections and future intersections proposed by the Union Station expansion project and Burnham Place. The Hopscotch Kids mosaic panels will need to be removed from the existing bridge before it is demolished. Then a portion of the undamaged tiles will be remade on new boards for display at another location. The unsightly wire mesh fencing on the east and west approaches to the bridge will be removed and replaced by new, more aesthetic fencing panels. The environmental assessment assesses the impacts to the environmental resources listed on this slide. First, the affected environment is identified and described in the document. The affected environment is considered the existing conditions of the project area. This is the content of Chapter 3. Then the impacts from the construction of the new bridge are described. These impacts are called the environmental consequences and are described in Chapter 4. These next two slides include a table that describes the environmental consequences or impacts based on the construction of the project. In the table, each resource is listed in the first column. Then the construction impact or permanent impact is described. Impacts to the resource may not occur or be beneficial or negative on the natural or human environment. The last column describes if the mitigation is proposed to reduce the impact. Mitigation is an environmental commitment which is required to be implemented for the project. Overall, negative impacts will occur during the construction due to the disruption of the activity. Beneficial impacts will be provided with the completion of the construction of the project. Additional detail on this information is included in Chapter 4 of the Environmental Assessment. Environmental commitments, which will be implemented to avoid, reduce, or mitigate project impacts, are included in Chapter 4, Section 21. Please take a moment to review these two slides. NEPA also requires several other evaluations and consultations to be performed in accordance with other environmental regulations. These include Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act of 1966, which requires the U.S. DOT to carefully evaluate any use of lands from parks, historic properties, or wildlife refuges. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office for any action that could affect resources listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The existing 8th Street Bridge Northeast is located over the Washington Union Station rail yard, which is a historic site eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. The project is also adjacent to two other historic properties. FHWA and DDOT will enter into a Memorandum of Agreement with the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Rail Yard Passenger Corporation, which prescribes protection of historic resources in the project area. Any copy of the draft MOA is presented in Appendix D of the Environmental Assessment. And finally, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act which requires protection of any threatened or endangered plant or animal species that may be found in the project area. As a result of this review for the project, no threatened or endangered plant or animal species was determined to occur and no further studies are required. The results of each of these evaluations and consultations are presented in the environmental assessment. This slide presentation is intended to provide you with information on the project and a summary of the findings contained in the environmental assessment. A digital copy of the complete environmental document is available on this project website. Please take the time to provide the project team with your comments on the environmental assessment. You can submit your written comments to the project team by using the comment tab on this website. Also, you can mail your written comments to DDOT at the address shown on this slide. All written comments are due by October 15, 2021. This slide presents the estimated time frame for the next steps in the project's development process. Following the formal approval of the preferred alternative, a combined final environmental assessment and decision document will be issued. This will complete the environmental process. A decision build contractor responsible for the final design and construction of the project will be selected before the end of next year. Construction of the project is expected to begin in 2023 and last for up to 5 years. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about this important DDOT project, and please check our website for further updates on this project. Your participation is very important to the successful completion of this project.